Today's topic, as you can see, is classifying transactions. I sort of alluded to this in last week's webinar when I talked about how you can classify tasks and said that that can be extrapolated to other areas. And this is that particular area and just so impactful if you're able to use this in some of the ways that we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, so again, classifying your transactions. Already you can classify your transactions the main way being to use transaction labels. They're specifically designed to classify or categorize your transactions. Typically, you'll use that to categorize your transactions by their type, like a residential property or a commercial or land and lot, maybe a rental, etc. We won't talk about those today. That's straightforward. That use is pretty widespread, and we cover that whenever we onboard admins as well as do training. So what we'll talk about today is more of a creative method of an additional level of classification. So we've gotten requests over the years to be able to do things like assign transactions to particular admins, or maybe flag transactions for certain reasons. Say maybe you've got a new agent, and as long as they've been with you under 2 years, you need to the managing broker needs to know so when they're doing their reviews, etc. And just other means of needing to classify or add that additional level of classification to your transaction or flag them somehow. And this method that we're going to go over will allow you to do that. Okay, so let's dive in. I'm going to head over to Pipeline. Okay, so if you were on the webinar last week, you saw how we used what we called visual indicators to kind of flag or just give you a visual highlight of a particular task, right? So what we're doing today is extrapolating that over to the transaction name. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to go right in and add a visual indicator. So let's go over to this transaction here. Edit it. And I'm going to change its name and add one of those visual indicators. So visual indicators is our sort of fancy, very official way of referencing emojis because you've got so many different options or icons that you can use as those emojis. And to call that or to bring that up to be able to select those, you would use on Windows your Windows key, hold down your Windows key, and then type a period to bring up that, that dialog to allow you to select an emoji. If you are on a Mac, you would do Command, Control, and Space to bring this up, okay? And then once you do, you've got a selection of tons of emojis, right? I'm going to stick here, and these are categories down below, and you can also search for a particular one. So if I wanted to search, let's say, for something called a document or something that looked like a document, I could type document or, you know, a star or whatever you're looking for, okay? But right now, I'm going to stick with the symbols because I want to keep it simple, and we'll talk about simplicity in a second. But so I'm going to stick with the symbols here, which is this little category here that's represented by the heart. And I'm going to go down and select just a color, just something simple to indicate a particular category or color, right? So I'm going to make that be orange, add a space just for visual spatial benefits, and then I'm going to save that. Okay, so now I've got a transaction that's got this color indicator at the beginning or a visual indicator at the beginning, okay? So this allows me to sort of use that as a category for whatever means I need to. Essentially, this is a character. It's an emoji, but it's essentially a character. So I'm just adding an extra character to the front of this transaction name. So that means a few things. One, that it's searchable, right? If I wanted to find this particular transaction, I could come here. I've actually searched it recently, so I'm going to go into my view recent searches. There it is. And then just search for that, and it finds all of those transactions that have that character contained in the transaction name. Or if I've got it in other places, it would do that as well. But for our purposes here today, we're just going to do it in the transaction name. Okay? So nice, clean list of all of those transactions that match that search. And again, it could be that I'm categorizing these for whatever I need to. I could be assigning these to admins. So maybe all of these, maybe orange represents those that I'm assigning to Judy. Maybe I do it based on, again, an agent's newness or their tenure with a brokerage, right? For whatever reason I need to, I could go ahead and specify them there, then search for them. And in those examples, let's say, again, I'm assigning it to a particular admin, If I'm an admin, I would probably want to search these regularly, right? So I've got my recent searches like I just did here, but even more efficient is that I could save these as a shortcut, right? So let's say I've run this search for this orange dot, and then I add it as a shortcut, okay? So let's say these are, depending on my perspective, it could be Jody's transactions, right? And I can save that search as a shortcut that'll appear there. If I'm Jody myself, maybe I just name them to my transactions, right? And then save that, then I can easily access my transactions there. If I'm doing them based on agent's tenure, maybe it's new agents, right? And I save that. So whatever is appropriate, I can go ahead and give it that name and then use it as a shortcut. That way, whenever I go, actually, let's say this is Jody's transactions there at that time. Okay, so I've got Jody shortcuts. That way, whenever I'm on my home page where this list shows, or here on my transactions, I can easily click it to go to that list. Okay, there's a tiny little bug in that. So give it a bit of time before these shortcuts work. This was actually something we discovered last week before we did the webinar. So we'll be fixing that so that the shortcuts actually reference or properly bring over the colored dot or whatever symbol that you use. But right now it's not quite searching properly. But just to know, once that's actually fixed, you'll be able to go ahead and use those as shortcuts. But super convenient to do so, again, because they'll appear both on your homepage and your transactions list under My Shortcuts. Okay. Cool deal. So they are searchable, they are custom shortcuttable as a result. So super, super convenient to, again, allow you that additional level of classification. Now, a few recommendations regarding these, because these are within the transaction name, and again, they're simply characters, they're going to appear wherever your transaction name appears. So that means when you're on your transactions list, right? Let me go to my main transactions list here. They're going to appear here. They'll appear on your unreviewed page, right? You've got some here. And on your home page even, depending on wherever transactions are shown, etc. Right? So you want to keep them simple. Don't clutter up this page or, again, your unreviewed page, etc. Since these transactions are going to appear everywhere, we recommend using as simple symbols as possible. These colors are a favorite of ours. They're unintrusive. They, again, are just clean and allow a very clear visual indicator of what something is, okay? Stars or other symbols might be fine also, but again, just keep it in mind in the context of your transaction list, your other lists where transactions appear, so that nothing looks too cluttered, okay? And you can always give it a try and see if it works and see what looks best for you without cluttering any of your lists, okay? Also keep in mind that they will be visible in emails, right? Because these are transactions that you're sending, transaction names that you're sending. So let's go ahead and pretend like we're sending a message here, okay? So when you send a message, the transaction name will automatically appear in the subject line if you don't include the transaction name yourself, right? So if my subject is, for example, just use one of these, complete tasks, right? The system will name that subject complete tasks, and then it'll append 1234 Bluebell Lane, number 2 Wilson. So it'll include that transaction name after the subject. So keep that in mind when you're sending messages, because that dot or whatever symbol you use will be included as well. Again, the dot is unintrusive. It's not going to alarm anyone or have them wonder what it is. So keeping it simple will suffice there. Also, if you end up using something, or just in general, if for whatever reason you don't want a transaction name to appear in your subject line, you can always suppress that. The way that you suppress the transaction name from appearing in the subject is to include the pipe symbol, which is on your keyboard just above the backslash. On my keyboard, it's above my enter key, but it shares the key with the backslash, and it looks like that. It's just a straight line. If you include that pipe at the beginning of your subject line, it'll suppress the transaction name from appearing or being added to that subject line. Okay, so just to keep that in mind in case you use a symbol and you just don't want it to show up, or want the transaction name to show up with that symbol. Okay, and then the last thing just to be aware of is, again, It's just a character in your transaction name, and these transaction names often appear in downloads, in Excel sheet brand downloads. They'll be included there as well. Excel doesn't do well at rendering the colors within them. They're just varying shades of gray, so just keep that in mind as well. Okay. Another tip you could potentially utilize to help support this categorization is your announcement. So let's say you're starting a new process where you're going to assign these transactions to admins based on this symbol or this color scheme, whatever you end up using. You could use your announcements here to just kind of educate them to start. It doesn't mean you have to leave this announcement live permanently. You could leave it up for a few weeks just until they're aware of it or get used to it. And Jody knows that hers are orange, Robert's are purple, and Claire's are green. And then you can always remove this announcement from your admin settings page. It's listed on your admin settings page. But that may be a method of helping people remember what their category or their symbol is. Okay. And lastly, just a little alert here. This has tons of benefits. There is one drawback though, and that is that by putting this character at the beginning of your transaction name, you lose the true sort of the ability to truly sort on that transaction name. So if it normally starts, actually go to a cleaner list here. If it normally starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, and you put a colored dot in front of it, this colored dot is the first character that it sees. If you've got a whole bunch of orange dots, it'll arrange it by that first, and then the transaction name's within there, so you've still got that as a secondary sort, but it's going to use that first character as the first sort. So that is the one drawback that you need to keep in mind to make sure that that's not going to be an issue for you if you decide to use this method. Okay. And that is it for this clever categorization of your transactions.